The unexpected proposal. Jake Carter woke up with a splitting headache. His body ached all over, and he could feel something soft beneath him. He blinked a few times, his vision adjusting to the dim light. The last thing he remembered was his spaceship shaking violently before crashing. Now he was in an unfamiliar place. He tried to sit up, but a gentle yet firm hand pushed him back down. "Rest, young one," a voice said. Jake turned his head and saw an alien woman, old but strong, sitting beside him. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, her eyes large and glowing with a soft golden light. She wore intricate robes, decorated with symbols he did not recognize. "Where am I?" Jake asked, his voice hoarse. "You are in my home, human," the old woman replied with a warm smile. "I am grandmother Selvera, and you are my future grandson-in-law." A shocking statement. Jake blinked. Grandson-in-law. He must have hit his head harder than he thought. "Wait, what?" Jake struggled to sit up. "I think there's been a mistake." "There is no mistake," Selvera said, nodding. "You have been chosen to bond with my granddaughter, Zyra." Jake felt his heart race. He barely understood what was happening, but one thing was clear. This was bad. "Yeah, I don't think that's happening," he said quickly. "I'm a human. Your granddaughter is, well, not. There's no way this can work." Grandmother Selvera only smiled. "The ancestors have spoken. A warrior must be matched with one who can challenge them in ways no one else can." Jake sighed. "Look, I appreciate the hospitality, but I really need to get back to my people. My ship. Destroyed," Selvera said simply. Jake froze. "Destroyed?" The old woman nodded. "It crashed in the deep jungle. The creatures there do not leave remains." Jake swallowed hard. This just kept getting worse. The warrior's introduction. Before he could say another word, a new voice interrupted. "He is weak." Jake turned and saw Zyra standing at the doorway. She was tall, her violet skin slightly darker than her grandmother's. Her piercing silver eyes studied him with clear disgust. She had a strong, muscular build, and the way she stood radiated authority. "He is not fit to bond with a warrior," Zyra said coldly. "I refuse." Jake sighed in relief. "Great. We agree. I refuse too." Selvera, however, simply smiled. "Then prove it," she said. Jake narrowed his eyes. "Prove what?" "You say you do not belong. She says you are weak. Then you will prove your strength in the way of our people. A challenge. A dangerous challenge." Jake did not like the sound of that. Zyra smirked. "A test of strength. If he wins, he can leave. If he loses," her smirk grew wider. "He accepts the bond." Jake sat up straight. Whoa, hold on. I never agreed to any challenge." "Then you accept the bond?" Selvera asked, raising an eyebrow. Jake clenched his jaw. This was a trap. He didn't know much about Zyra, but from the way she carried herself, she was clearly a warrior. He, on the other hand, was a pilot. He knew how to fight smart, but if this was a test of brute strength, he was in trouble. Still, if it was the only way out. He exhaled sharply. "Fine. What's the challenge?" Selvera nodded approvingly. "Tomorrow, at sunrise. Be ready, human." Zyra turned without another word and walked away. Jake watched her go, already regretting every choice that had led him here. The hidden truth. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He lay on the simple bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. Why were they so insistent on this bonding? He wasn't even one of them. And something else bothered him. The look in Selvera's eyes. She was too calm, too sure about all of this, as if she knew something he didn't. He needed to escape. Quietly, he got up and moved toward the door. The village was dark, only a few torches lighting the paths. He stepped outside, his heartbeat quickening. He just had to get past the guards and into the jungle. But before he could take another step, he felt something watching him. Jake turned slowly. In the shadows beyond the village, deep in the jungle, glowing red eyes stared at him. Unblinking, silent, waiting. His breath caught in his throat. What else was out there? The trial of strength. The morning air was thick with tension. The village square, a wide open space lined with strange, glowing stones, was now filled with onlookers. Tall, violet-skinned aliens with piercing eyes. They stood in silence, watching, waiting. Jake Carter stood in the middle of it all, heart pounding. He wasn't sure if it was nerves or the realization that he was about to fight a trained alien warrior who hated his existence. Across from him, Zyra stood calm, focused, and deadly. The rising sun cast long shadows, making her look even taller than she already was. Her silver eyes never blinked, never wavered. Her grandmother, Zelvera, sat on a high stone throne, her expression unreadable. "The challenge begins now," she announced. A heavy silence fell over the crowd. Jake barely had time to react before Zyra moved. An unfair fight. Jake's instincts kicked in. Dodge first, think later. Zyra's fist came fast, too fast. He barely twisted out of the way. But even as he moved, she was already adjusting, her body flowing like a battle-hardened predator. "She's testing me." Jake realized it immediately. She wasn't going full force yet. She wanted to see how he moved, how he reacted. She was hunting him. Great, on the prey. He ducked another strike, then jumped back, trying to put space between them. But Zyra was relentless. She stepped forward. 1, 2, 3 strikes in quick succession. The last one grazed his ribs, sending a sharp jolt of pain through his side. Jake gritted his teeth. If she landed a clean hit, it was over. The crowd murmured, their alien language filled with amusement. They enjoyed this. To them, he wasn't a challenger, he was entertainment. A change in strategy. Jake wasn't the strongest. He wasn't the fastest, but he was smart. Zyra fought like a warrior, direct, powerful, precise. She expected him to match her strength, but Jake wasn't going to play her game. He faked left, making her shift her weight. Then he twisted right, dodging her next strike completely. The sudden maneuver threw her off balance. Jake saw an opening. Instead of attacking, he swept his foot low. A simple but effective move. Zyra stumbled, just for a fraction of a second. But that fraction was enough. Jake used the moment to step in close, too close for her to swing. He jabbed an elbow into her side. Not hard, but enough to prove a point. The crowd gasped. Zyra's eyes flashed with fury. No more holding back. Jake barely had time to breathe before Zyra exploded with power. Her knee shot up, slamming into his stomach. The impact sent him skidding backward across the ground, knocking the wind out of him. Pain flared in his ribs. He coughed, trying to suck in air. Zyra stepped forward, her movements sharper, more focused. "I was going easy on you," she said coldly. Jake wiped blood from his lip. "Yeah, I got that part." Now she was serious. Jake barely dodged her next attack. Then another. Then another. She was faster now. He blocked one strike. Then another. But her next blow was too strong. Her fist slammed into his chest, sending him tumbling to the ground. The world spun. His arms felt heavy. His breathing was ragged. "I'm losing." The turning point. Zyra stood over him, looking disappointed. "You are weak," she said. "You do not belong here." Jake forced himself up, gasping for air. His vision blurred for a moment, but he fought through it. "Think, Carter. Think." This wasn't about winning. This was about surviving. Then he saw it. Zyra's stance. She was too rigid, too focused on power. She wasn't expecting unpredictability. Jake took a deep breath. He could still turn this fight around. The final move. Zyra lunged, aiming for the finishing blow. But Jake moved lower, faster, different. He rolled to the side, grabbed a handful of dirt, and flung it toward her eyes. It was a dirty trick, and it worked. Zyra flinched, her vision momentarily blocked. Jake took the chance. He charged forward, slamming his shoulder into her midsection, knocking her off balance. The crowd gasped. Jake didn't attack again. He just stepped back, standing tall, arms loose at his sides. He wasn't fighting to win anymore. He was proving a point. Zyra wiped her eyes, blinking. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. And then she laughed. Not cruel, not mocking, just amused. A warrior's respect. The fight was over. Jake had lost in strength, but he had proven he was more than just a weak human. Zyra smirked. "You fight like a coward," she said. Jake grinned. "No, I fight like someone who wants to stay alive." Zelvera nodded approvingly. The ancestors smile upon this battle. The challenge is complete. Jake waited for the verdict. Then the old woman smiled. "You will make a fine mate for my granddaughter." Jake's stomach dropped. Wait, what? The hidden threat. The sun had barely set, casting the alien village in shades of deep purple and gold, but Jake Carter's mind was anything but peaceful. He was still processing what had just happened. He had lost the fight against Zyra, technically. But instead of getting out of this mess, he had somehow proven himself worthy in the eyes of the alien elders. Now, Grandmother Zelvera was more convinced than ever that he was the perfect match for Zyra. The worst part, Zyra wasn't even arguing anymore. She just gave him that infuriating smirk, like she had been expecting this outcome all along. Jake sat on the edge of a stone ledge, rubbing his sore ribs. I really should have lost faster. A shadow loomed over him. He looked up and found Zyra standing there, arms crossed, looking down at him like he was an amusing puzzle. "You're still alive," she noted. Jake sighed. "Yeah, sadly. You fought well, for a human." Jake frowned. Was that a compliment? It was hard to tell with her. She turned away. "Come, we have patrol duty." Jake blinked. "Wait, what? Patrol duty? You are one of us now," she said over her shoulder. "You will work like one of us." Jake groaned. "Great. First, I get forced into a marriage proposal. And now I get free labor. Do I at least get health benefits?" Zyra didn't even dignify that with a response. A dark discovery. Jake followed Zyra through the winding paths of the village. Torches flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. The village itself was beautiful in an eerie way. Towering stone structures, glowing alien plants, and strange symbols carved into the ground. It would have been fascinating if he wasn't stuck here. Soon, they'd reached the jungle's edge. Jake hesitated. He still remembered those glowing red eyes from the night before. "What exactly are we looking for?" he asked. "Trouble," Zyra said simply. Jake sighed. Fantastic. The deeper they went, the thicker the jungle became. Strange sounds echoed in the distance. Whispers, rustling leaves, something moving just out of sight. Zyra didn't seem bothered, but Jake's instincts screamed at him that something was wrong. Then they found it. Jake stopped short, staring at the ground. Something was there. It looked like a massive footprint, clawed and deep, embedded into the dirt. Zyra knelt beside it, running her fingers over the grooves. Her expression darkened. "This is fresh," she murmured. Jake swallowed. "That's not a good thing, is it?" Zyra stood, scanning the trees. "We need to move. Now." A predator in the dark. They barely took 2 steps before the jungle exploded into chaos. Something huge crashed through the trees, moving faster than anything that size should have been able to. Jake barely had time to react before Zyra tackled him to the ground. A massive black-clawed limb swiped over their heads, cutting through the air with a horrifying screech. Jake's heart hammered. He looked up and saw it. A creature unlike anything he had ever seen before. It stood over 10 feet tall, its body covered in sleek, obsidian-like armor. Its eyes glowed a deep, unnatural red, the same ones Jake had seen watching him before. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Jake froze. This thing was a predator, and it had just found its prey. Run or fight. Zyra was already moving. She rolled to her feet, pulling a strange, curved blade from her waist. Jake, however, was still stuck on the part where they were about to be eaten. "Tell me you have a plan," he hissed. Zyra's eyes narrowed. "We kill it." Jake laughed nervously. "Right, just like that, huh? We kill the giant nightmare creature." The creature lunged. Jake barely dodged, rolling out of the way as its claws carved deep grooves into the ground where he had just been standing. Zyra was already attacking, moving like lightning, her blade slashing at its limbs. The creature roared in frustration, but didn't fall. It was too fast. Jake grabbed a broken branch from the ground. "Well, this is useless." The creature lunged at him this time. Jake had no choice. He dove under it, sliding between its legs just as Zyra landed another strike on its side. Then, something weird happened. The creature hesitated. Zyra frowned. "It's retreating." And just like that, the massive beast let out a guttural growl, then vanished into the jungle, melting into the darkness like a ghost. Jake stayed frozen for a long moment. Then he turned to Zyra. "Yeah, I don't like that. A dangerous truth." Zyra sheathed her blade. "This is bad." Jake threw up his hands. "Really? I thought we were having a lovely stroll through the murder forest." She ignored him, looking at the direction where the creature had vanished. "They don't usually retreat, not unless." She trailed off, her expression grim. "Unless what?" Jake asked. Zyra turned to him. "Unless they are hunting something more important." Jake stiffened. A sinking feeling formed in his gut. "Like the village," he whispered. Zyra didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed his arm and started running. The ancient secret. The village was too quiet. Jake Carter slowed his steps as he and Zyra neared the outer walls, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. The torches still burned, flickering in the evening air, but there were no voices, no movement, no guards. Zyra's usual confidence had shifted into something sharper, battle-ready. She gripped her blade tighter, her silver eyes scanning every shadow. Jake swallowed hard. "I don't like this." "Stay close," Zyra ordered. She didn't have to tell him twice. They slipped through the village gate, moving carefully between the towering stone structures. The streets were deserted. No merchants, no workers, no elders. No one. Jake's heart pounded. The place had been full of life just hours ago. Now, it was a ghost town. Then, he noticed something worse. The doors to every hut, every building, were wide open, like people had left in a hurry, or been taken. The first clue. Zyra moved like a predator, her every step controlled and calculated. Jake did his best to keep up without tripping over his own fear. Then she stopped. Jake nearly bumped into her before following her gaze. His stomach dropped. There, in the center of the village, deep claw marks were gouged into the stone ground. They weren't just random scratches. They were patterns, symbols, a message. Zyra ran her fingers over the grooves, her jaw tightening. "This is old writing, older than the village itself." Jake crouched beside her. "What does it say?" She hesitated. "It's a warning." Jake tensed. "A warning about what?" Zyra exhaled slowly, then stood. "The ones who came before." Jake frowned. "I'm gonna need a little more explanation than that, warrior princess." Zyra shot him an annoyed glance but didn't argue. "Long ago, before my people settled here, there were others. A race that built great cities and had knowledge beyond anything we understood. But they vanished, leaving only ruins and secrets." Jake glanced back at the clawed writing. And let me guess, whatever took your people is connected to them. Before Zyra could answer, a low growl rumbled through the air. Jake froze. Then, from the shadows, they appeared. The creature's return. Glowing red eyes emerged from the darkness. Jake's breath caught. The same nightmare creatures from the jungle, their sleek, obsidian-like bodies rippling in the torchlight. But this time, there were dozens of them. Zyra pulled her blade free. They didn't take the villagers. They are still here. Jake's brain barely had time to process that before the first creature lunged. Zyra met it head-on, slicing through its side before flipping backward, avoiding a second attack. The creature screeched, black ichor dripping from its wound. Jake wasn't a fighter, but he wasn't stupid. He grabbed a fallen spear from the ground, spinning just in time to block a swipe aimed at his head. The impact rattled his arms. "How do we kill these things?" he yelled. "Deep wounds slow them down," Zyra shouted back. "But there are too many." Jake barely dodged another attack before realizing she was right. They weren't going to win this fight. They had to get out. A desperate plan. Jake's eyes darted to the temple-like structure at the far end of the village. It was the only building still sealed shut. "That temple," he shouted. "It's still locked. Why?" Zyra parried another attack, then followed his gaze. Her expression shifted. "Because it's a tomb." Jake's stomach sank. "A tomb for what?" Zyra hesitated. "For the last warrior to face these creatures." Jake stared. "And you thought this wasn't important to mention." She grabbed his arm. "It won't matter if we die here. We move. Now." Together, they bolted for the temple, creatures snarling behind them. Jake barely made it inside before Zyra slammed the stone doors shut. The creatures pounded against the entrance, their shrieks echoing through the air. But the doors held. For now. The forgotten warrior. Jake turned, taking in the massive chamber. The walls were lined with ancient symbols, torches burning with an unnatural blue flame. At the center of the room stood a stone coffin, sealed with intricate carvings. Zyra stepped closer, her fingers trailing over the writing. Her face darkened. "It says." She paused, translating. Jake waited, his pulse still racing. "It says, only the chosen will wake the last guardian." Jake frowned. "Guardian?" Before Zyra could answer, the ground trembled. The carvings on the coffin began to glow. And then, the lid slid open. Jake staggered back as a wave of energy rushed through the room. Inside the stone coffin, lying in stillness, was a figure. Not fully alien, not fully human. Something else. Its eyes snapped open. The battle for survival. A deep hum filled the ancient temple. The stone coffin was now glowing, strange symbols pulsing with energy. Dust swirled in the air as the figure inside opened its eyes. Jake stared, frozen. The being was tall, humanoid, but with features that were neither fully human nor fully alien. Its skin had an iridescent glow, shifting between colors Jake had never seen before. Its eyes burned like twin suns, radiating power. Then it spoke. "You are not my people." Its voice was deep and layered, as if multiple voices spoke at once. Jake's throat went dry. "Nope, definitely not." Zyra stepped forward, blade drawn. "Who are you?" The figure studied them, eyes filled with something ancient. Then it looked past them, toward the massive stone doors, where the creatures outside were pounding, snarling, shrieking. It sighed. "They have returned." The doors shuddered violently. The creatures were growing more desperate. The stone wouldn't hold much longer. Jake glanced between the mysterious figure and the breaking doors. Yeah, and we're kind of outnumbered." The figure tilted its head. "Then I shall fight." Before Jake could ask what that meant, the being raised its hand. The entire temple trembled. Then, the doors exploded open. The battle begins. The creatures flooded in, snarling masses of dark limbs and glowing red eyes. Jake barely had time to react. Zara lunged first, her blade slicing through one of the beasts, black ichor spraying across the stone. But there were too many. Jake grabbed a fallen spear from the temple floor, spinning just in time to deflect a strike aimed at his throat. The force rattled his arms. Then the ancient figure moved. It wasn't fighting like Zara. It didn't dodge. It didn't retreat. It simply walked forward, unshaken. One of the creatures leaped at it, but before it could land, the figure raised a hand. A shockwave of pure energy erupted outward. The creature was obliterated instantly. Jake blinked. "Okay," he muttered. "That's new. A turning point." The creatures hesitated. For the first time, they seemed unsure. But only for a second. Then they attacked again, even faster. The ancient being moved fluidly, raising one hand, then the other. The air itself seemed to bend. A second shockwave ripped through the battlefield, sending creatures flying. Zara took the opening. She spun, her blade flashing like lightning, cutting through their ranks. Jake? He did what he did best. Survived. He dove, rolled, ducked, and stabbed when he had to. He was no warrior, but he was fast, smart. One of the creatures lunged for his back. Zara whirled, slicing its head clean off. She didn't even look at him. "Try not to die, human." Jake panted. "Yeah, working on it." The battle raged on, but now they had a chance. The ancient beam's warning. The temple trembled again as the figure raised both hands this time. The ground itself cracked open, a brilliant energy surging through the air. The creatures froze. Then they screamed. One by one, they began to flee. Jake gasped for breath. Did we win? The ancient figure lowered its hand slowly. Its glowing eyes dimmed. "No," it said. Jake stiffened. Zara frowned. "What do you mean?" The figure turned to them, its expression unreadable. "They were not here for you," it said. "They were here for me." Jake's stomach dropped. "Okay, that's worse." The forgotten past. The figure finally seemed to study them fully. "You do not know what you have awoken," it said. Zara tightened her grip on her blade. "Then tell us." The figure exhaled. "My name was lost to time. But once I was the protector of this world. Before your people came, before your wars, before the corruption." Jake felt a chill. Corruption. The figure gestured to the fleeing creatures. "They are not the enemy. They are the victims." Jake and Zara exchanged glances. "They were once my people." Silence fell. Jake swallowed. "You're saying those monsters were alive, like thinking normal people?" The figure nodded. "Before the war, before the great betrayal." Zara's face darkened. "What betrayal?" The figure's eyes burned again. "The one that started with your ancestors. The final choice." The air inside the ancient temple felt thick, heavy with something unseen. The glow of the forgotten warrior's eyes pulsed, reflecting the weight of a buried truth, one that Zara clearly didn't want to accept. Jake Carter. He was tired of secrets. "So let me get this straight," he said, still catching his breath. "Those things, those nightmare creatures we've been fighting, they're not just monsters." The ancient being nodded. "They were once like you, flesh and thought, minds and souls. But they were changed." Jake frowned. "Changed? By what?" The warrior turned to Zara. "By your ancestors." Silence. Zara's grip tightened around her blade. Her usually unreadable expression cracked for a fraction of a second. Doubt flickered across her silver eyes. "You lie," she said, but it was more of a question than a statement. Jake noticed. The warrior didn't move. "I do not lie. I remember. I was there." Jake's stomach turned. "How long have you been down here?" The warrior's eyes dimmed slightly, long enough to watch history rewrite itself. That sentence sent a chill down Jake's spine. A war forgotten. The ancient warrior slowly stepped toward the ruined carvings on the temple walls, rushing a hand over the ancient symbols. At his touch, they flickered to life, glowing with faded energy. "This was not always a place of death," he said. "This world was once a sanctuary, a home for my people. We were advanced, peaceful, but we were not alone in the stars." Jake and Zira listened in silence. Then came the war, a war we did not seek, a war waged by those who feared what they did not understand. Zira stiffened. "You're saying, my ancestors attacked you?" The warrior turned to her, studying her with those ageless, unreadable eyes. "Not just yours," he said. Then he turned to Jake. "Yours too." Jake felt his breath catch. "What?" he whispered. The warrior motioned, and suddenly the temple walls shifted. The carvings rearranged, revealing an image hidden beneath layers of time. And when Jake saw it, he felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. Because it was humans. Humans, fighting alongside Zira's ancestors. Zira's face darkened as she took in the scene. It wasn't just a battle. It was a massacre. She exhaled sharply. "No, this can't be right." Jake shook his head. "I don't get it. If our people fought together, what happened?" The warrior's gaze hardened. "Betrayal. The experiment that went wrong." The warrior waved his hand again, and the carving shifted once more. This time, the images showed something far worse. Jake squinted, trying to make sense of the chaotic figures. It showed people, humans, and Zira's kind, working together. But something changed. Then came the machines. Jake's pulse quickened. The creatures, they weren't just victims of war. They were the result of an experiment. "What is this?" Zira whispered. The warrior's voice was low. "A weapon, one that was meant to reshape the battlefield. One that was meant to create the ultimate soldier. But it failed." Jake's throat went dry. The creatures. They weren't just fallen soldiers. They were what remained of those experiments. Your ancestors, along with the humans who came here, sought to make warriors who felt no fear, no pain. But they lost control. The project turned on its masters. And so, they sealed it away. Zira looked pale, as if someone had torn apart everything she believed in. Jake was furious. "Are you telling me," he said slowly, "that my people, humanity, helped create this nightmare?" The warrior nodded. "Not all humans, but enough. The choice that cannot be undone." The air grew heavy. The warrior studied both of them carefully, then stepped back toward the center of the temple. "Now the corruption spreads again," he said. "The creatures have grown stronger, their numbers rising. And I am the last of my kind, the last one who remembers the truth." Jake exchanged a glance with Zira. "Then why now?" Zira asked. "Why are they attacking again after so long?" The warrior's glowing eyes dimmed. "Because I woke up." Jake's stomach twisted. It made horrible sense. The creatures weren't attacking because of Zira's people. They weren't attacking because of Jake. They were attacking because they knew he was here. They had been waiting for this moment. "The war is not over," the warrior said. "And now, you must decide how it ends." Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" The warrior slowly raised his hands. In one palm, a strange, glowing crystal appeared, pulsing with energy. "In this, the knowledge of my people remains," he said. "It holds the truth, the history, and the cure." Zira's eyes narrowed. "Cure? Their minds are still inside," the warrior said. "Trapped, twisted, but they are not beyond saving." Jake's pulse raced. "Wait, you're saying we can fix them?" The warrior nodded. "Yes, but it is not the only choice." In his other hand, a second object materialized, a weapon. "This," the warrior said, "is the means to end them." Jake froze. He looked between the two. One hand held hope. The other held destruction. The warrior looked at them both. You must choose. Do you seek to end them, or to free them? A new future. The two objects in the warrior's hands glowed softly, casting eerie shadows against the stone walls of the ancient temple. One held the key to ending the creatures forever, a weapon, pure destruction. The other, a cure, a chance to undo centuries of suffering. Jake Carter felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about what kind of future they wanted to leave behind. Zyra's fingers twitched near her blade. Her face was stone cold, unreadable, but Jake could see the battle raging in her eyes. I was raised to believe they were monsters, she said quietly, that they deserved to die. Jake swallowed. And now? She didn't answer. Because the truth was painful. The creatures weren't just monsters. They were victims. They had been people, people with thoughts, memories, families. And now, they were trapped in a nightmare someone else created. Jake exhaled sharply. I'm voting for the cure. Zyra's jaw tightened. You're sure? Jake laughed without humor. No, but if there's even a chance, just a chance, we can fix this. Then we have to try. Zyra's silver eyes met his. She had never trusted humans before. But Jake, he wasn't like the others. Finally, she sighed. Fine. But if we die, I'm blaming you. Jake grinned. Deal. Activating the cure. The ancient warrior watched them carefully, then nodded. Then it shall be done. He raised the glowing crystal, whispering something in a language neither Jake nor Zyra understood. The entire temple began to shake. Outside, the nightmarish creatures screeched. Jake's pulse spiked. That's not a good sound. Zyra stepped closer to the doors, blade drawn. They know. They always knew, the warrior corrected. But now, they must decide. Will they fight for their chains, or will they break free? The crystal shattered. A brilliant wave of light pulsed outward, racing across the village, through the jungle, into the very air itself. It was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. It wasn't fire. It wasn't destruction. It was memory. The awakening. The creatures froze. One by one, their glowing red eyes flickered, then changed. Some collapsed, screeching in pain, as if their very bodies were trying to fight against something unseen. Others stood motionless, as if trapped between two realities. Then, the first one spoke. It was barely a whisper, a rasping, broken sound. But it was a word. A name. The creature clutched its head, eyes flickering between red and something else. Something almost human. More of them began whispering. Some in Zyra's language. Some in words Jake almost recognized. By the stars, Zyra whispered. It's working. Jake felt his chest tighten. It was one thing to know they had once been people. It was another thing entirely to watch them remember. The ground shook again, but this time, it wasn't an attack. It was a shift. Something deep in the planet itself was changing. The warrior took a slow breath. It is done. The last decision. The creatures, what remained of them, were no longer attacking. Some fell to the ground, weak but alive. Others simply left, vanishing into the jungle, as if needing to understand what had happened to them. Zyra sheathed her blade slowly. I don't know what to do with this. Jake let out a shaky breath. Neither do I. He turned to the warrior. What happens now? The ancient being studied them both, his eyes glowing dimly. You have given them a choice, he said. Now, it is up to them to decide what they will become. Jake glanced at Zyra. And what about your people? When they find out the truth? Zyra exhaled. They will not accept it easily, but they must. The warrior nodded approvingly. Then you will be their bridge. Zyra blinked. What? Jake chuckled nervously. Yeah, what? The warrior tilted his head slightly. You both stand between two worlds. You, warrior, must teach your people the truth they have long ignored. And you, human, His glowing eyes settled on Jake. You were never meant to be here, but you are. And so, you must decide. Will you stay? Jake's choice. Jake froze. He had spent this entire time trying to get home, trying to escape. But now, he wasn't sure. He glanced at Zyra. She raised an eyebrow. Well? Jake exhaled sharply. You're not going to make this easy, are you? She smirked. Where's the fun in that? Jake rolled his eyes. You know what? Fine. I'll stick around. Someone has to make sure you don't get yourself killed. Zyra's smirk widened. I knew you'd see reason. Jake sighed. Yeah. Just don't expect me to start calling your grandmother Grandma anytime soon. A voice cleared behind them. Jake turned. Telvera was standing in the temple entrance. She smiled. We shall see. Final scene. A new beginning. The village was waking up again. The missing people returned. The warriors, even those who had doubted Jake the most, watched in stunned silence as the creatures they had feared for generations were no longer mindless killers. The war was over. But that didn't mean the fight was. Because now, Jake and Zyra had a new mission. Not just to protect this world, but to rebuild it. Together. Final line. As they walked out of the temple, side by side, Jake sighed. So, does this mean I still have to marry you? Zyra smirked. That depends. Jake frowned. On what? Zyra grinned. On whether you survive long enough to propose first. Jake groaned. Great, just great.